Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to discuss the defense from that big win over the Seahawks on Sunday. It's going to be a fun episode, I know, for a lot of reasons. We've got a great game to discuss, and we've got Gabe Ferguson here to discuss it with. Gabe, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken, and yep, I'm looking forward to this one. It's a dominating performance, and it's always fun to talk about those games.
Yeah, sure is. This is the third now complete trampling of what I think will all be playoff contending, at least, opponents this season. They destroyed the Browns in Cleveland, whether or not it was a backup quarterback. They destroyed Detroit with no real excuses for Detroit offered from that game in Baltimore. And then they just did basically the same thing to the Seattle Seahawks here. And they are pretty much without excuses after making a huge trade during the week to get Leonard Williams.
Yeah, and this is twice now that we've had highly billed games, I think, going into it with between the Detroit Lions and the Seattle Seahawks, division leading teams, teams that have had a lot of expectations coming into the season, have played well, and then it's just become a laugher, like almost immediately. The Lions game probably a little faster than this game in terms of like how quickly it got out of hand, but just a really impressive performance overall. And I think this is something that, this Ravens team obviously is very capable of, and I'm hoping that we might see a few more of them down the stretch as well.
It would be great because they're going to play some good teams. So it'd be nice to pick up one of these maybe in the playoffs. Would be a great time for it.
Absolutely.
One of the things that naturally comes up whenever they have a big win like this and they beat a really good team is, where does this fit among the great Ravens wins of all time? And I want to be clear about the definition I'm asking here for. And we've already talked about this pre-show, so you've had a chance to kind of make up your own list here. But we're talking about dominating wins. We're not talking about what was your best football game or what was the first football game you went to or when some player gave you a glove or how great the game was because of the Mile High Miracle. We're talking about times where the Ravens beat the snot out of an opponent and hopefully beat the snot out of a good opponent. And I would think, it means that much more when they do it in the playoffs. But all of those factors together, not a close game by any means, just a one-sided dominating beatdown of a win, which this 37-3 win over the Seahawks certainly qualifies as.
Yeah, this one is definitely on the list. It's I think both the games that we talked about, the Detroit game and this game would go on the list. And if I'm having to rank them, I think for this season alone, I actually think the Detroit game is a little bit more impressive than the Seattle game. There's a few reasons for that. One is just the way it was basically over in a quarter against Detroit. They came out and they had three and out on defense and touchdown on offense. You can't ask for a better start to any game than that. And the rest of the game was pretty much garbage time. Like, there really wasn't much more of that game. The Ravens kind of took the foot off the pedal at the halftime. Like, they could have scored another 35 points in the second half if they'd want to, and they just completely didn't try to. So that for me would be my third overall. And just
third overall. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so we'll jump right into the list here. Fantastic game, by the way, and I loved it. The 32-9 edge in plays after the Ravens' fourth drive when they scored their fourth TD. And they'd had 3 and outs is just one of the most amazing statistics I've ever seen in terms of dominating a football game. I'll give you my number 3 game, and it's one that I always recommend to people who maybe they have somebody in the family or a younger fan that's just wasn't around back in 2011. Have them watch this game when you want them to understand just how dominant the Mount Rushmore of Ravens defenders were. Terrell Suggs, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, and Haloti Ngata. Those 4 guys on opening day against Pittsburgh in 2011 put together one of the biggest beatdowns in franchise history, 35-7. They won the turnover battle 7-0. All of those 4 Mount Rushmore players had contributions, I believe, to multiple turnovers in that game. So it's one of these things. There was so many turnover shares to be allocated. It's even funny. Haloti Ngata had one of the biggest hits you'll ever see on a running back. His eyes got all wide. The ball came loose. He fell on the football himself. He tipped another ball for an interception. That went to Lewis, I believe. Suggs had a couple of strip sacks. And Ed Reed, of course, had picks on the back end. So it just was that kind of a beautiful day, an opener. And it's one of the few times that I've actually seen Tomlin get emotionally upset on the sideline at his own players. And that was something really special about that game. But they turned the ball over right away. They gave up a touchdown, then they turned the ball over again. And it was one of these, 3-play sequences where Tomlin just exploded at his own players in terms of what was happening.
That was going to be the number one game, actually. So okay. I'm glad you mentioned one of my all-time favorite games as a Ravens fan. It was sweet because of the way the 2010 season ended, losing to Pittsburgh in the playoffs in like a really excruciating way, to come back and have that next game against them and kind of hand it to them. One of my favorite plays in that game was actually the Jarrett Johnson play. Some of the older fans might remember him completely depleting Hines Ward in the backfield. Very fun play to watch. But yeah, just the overall dominance of that game. That was extraordinary. So I love that game. I'm glad you had it there. So I think I'll pivot to a game from the 2019 season that I thought was extraordinarily beat down-ish, which would be the Rams game, where I think it was a Jackson 5 performance, 5 touchdown passes, defense completely dominated, a Rams team that, they may not have been as good as the previous iterations of the Rams teams a couple seasons before that, or even the previous season, but they were still a good team. They had a lot of good players, Sean McVay, head coach, team, and the Ravens were favored going into it, but they weren't favored by 40 points. That was a really dominant performance, and that was a fun game to watch on Monday Night Football.
Yeah, outstanding game, and it's number 5 on my list, which you can find, by the way, in my article this week on the defense. If you want to take a look for that, appreciate the opportunity to plug that. Eric Weddle had the best comment about that. They peeled our faces off. And it's just a comment that I absolutely love coming from Weddle. He told it like it is there. Weddle, when I first heard him speak, by the way, did not really seem like a particularly great leader to me. He did some things on the field in camp that I think he probably was told not to do again, but the offense was going through a tough run against the defense. And Eric Weddle is over there on the sideline watching the number 2s beat up the number 1s and the number 2s on offense. He goes, "You guys look like the bad news Bears offense. You look like the bad news Bears." And I couldn't tell exactly where it's coming from. And Sandusky tells me that's Eric Weddle saying that. Like, it was just really funny. But anyway, he obviously loved the game, and that was a game he obviously felt bad losing. The Ravens are on an amazing streak of basically scoring every single drive. When they got to LA, they'd played I think the Cincinnati game the previous week or the next week. I kind of forget which is the Lamar spin game.
Yep.
And they basically were unstoppable on offense during that time. It was also the Rams game was the revenge game for Marcus Peters, and he went out there and he got a pick, and then he had the jawing at Jalen Ramsey after the game.
Yeah, a lot of reasons to enjoy that game, and obviously the Ravens were in the middle of like a tremendous streak, like you said, with the scoring streak, but also, I mean, they were in the middle of their 12-game win streak at that point. So that was a really fun game for sure.
All right, so I have to call my number 2 game. We go way back in the annals of Ravens history of this to 12-5-99. On that day, the Ravens beat the Tennessee Titans 41-14. Well, 27-point win over the Titans, sure, it's a big one. That was a Titans team that came 1 yard away from tying the Super Bowl.
Yep.
So, it's one of the best teams they've ever beaten, period, and they beat them by 27. In a lot of ways, that started a 4-game winning streak, and that was kind of a coming-of-age game for the dynasty. That really led into that 2000 season where they were terrific, of course, all the way through. But they had a loss at the end of the regular season to New England, and they were just barely eliminated on I believe the second to last week of the season. Before they played that game against New England, and had a 4-game winning streak and played great defense throughout that streak. And I remember Rod Woodson returning a pick for a touchdown from that game. I don't remember too much else about it other than saying, sitting with friends in the upper deck that I didn't normally go to football with. These are a bunch of actuaries from around Transamerica, so we're in from other cities. And I basically said, they've never played a game this good. And it was absolutely true. They never played a game anywhere near this good. And it was an exciting one.
Yeah, that was the game. That was, I was a little younger for that one. And I remember, the Titans were a good team then. I was like, okay, this Ravens team is, they're not just a bunch of kind of talkers, they actually have something to them at that point. So they had my attention then. as a younger fan. And I think that obviously the next year they were realized as their full potential of what kind of a dominant defense and running team they could be. So that was a good one to go back to it in the earlier, phases of the Ravens as the team that they were going to become.
Okay, so your number one game was the Pittsburgh game.
Yeah, so that was going to be my number one. I think if I had a backup for that, it would actually be the game against. I'm struggling here. It was. Oh, sorry, the Super Bowl. That's what I had.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. The Super Bowl was the game that I was thinking of. The Giants Super Bowl,
yes.
Where they were, just completely game over, like from the beginning. It was there's a laugher. One of the most boring Super Bowls you'll ever watch. Unfortunately,
if you're not a Ravens fan.
If you're not a Ravens fan, but it was, it was just in the biggest stage, obviously in the playoffs, the Super Bowl, and the kind of like be a game where it's just okay, we're gonna just have fun the rest of the time because the Giants aren't going to have a chance to get into this one. It was the dominant defense performance and offense made a couple of plays early on to put the lead up, and that's it.
Yep. 27-0 on offense. Each team had a kickoff return for a touchdown, actually on consecutive plays. But the 27-0 on offense is as dominant a Super Bowl performance as there's ever been. I think whether they have 112 yards or something, might have been 112 yards passing. Ray Lewis, despite the fact that he only made 5 tackles in the game, had 4 PDs in the first half. One of them went for an interception to Jamie Sharper. He didn't get an interception himself, but just an unbelievable game, highlighted by that come from behind trip up of who's the guy running back Barber running left. Starks had the pick early in the second half that put him up 17-0, and we were, of course, in the stands that day jumping up and down saying that's it, we've got the Super Bowl now. They probably had it at 10-0. In fact, as things turned out, they probably did. But very, very impressive win. It's the boring answer, but you just look at every way they statistically dominated that game. There's not another team that they beat as badly. And that Giants team was a good team that had just outscored their 2 playoff opponents. It's some ridiculous amount. They won the NFC Championship 41-0 against truly a not very good Vikings team. It's one of the worst teams ever to make the NFC Championship. But they won their previous game something like 27-7 or something, 27-10 maybe. But it was an impressive win also. So the Giants, no slouches as opponents. The Ravens are only about 2.5 point favorites in the game, which seems ridiculous at this point. But they certainly did destroy them.
Yep. So you have a number one as well, or is that
was my number one? Yeah.
Okay.
All right, but that's okay. We're among friends here. It's okay that you stole my number one. That's all right. Anyway, let's get back to the show outline so I can take us into what is next. All right. So anyway, the Ravens extended their lead to 35 to 4 with 35 sacks. That's 4 more than Kansas City, 5 more than Philadelphia, and 8 more than 3 teams who've all played 1 less game: Seattle, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland. So I guess it's possible they could be caught, but we're at a point right now. We're 9 games into the season. This is not some sort of mirage that the Ravens have a good pass rush, is it?
I certainly don't think so. Their pass rush is really interesting to me because a lot of it's scheme driven, and that is something that the Ravens pass rush has in the past been largely scheme driven, but they never had this kind of production. So in this sense, they're putting the scheme and the players together in a way that's just making a beautiful symphony. And it seems like it's just working on all cylinders. And, they've done, I think in my estimation, a little bit more upfront in terms of stunts, twists than they have in years past, but they haven't really been as heavily a blitzing team in terms of like linebackers blitzing, numbers blitzing in the years past. So that's a really, that's an added benefit to because you're able to drop those players in the coverage and still get the pressure, still get the sacks. And that's something that this team hasn't been able to do in years past.
Yeah, pitching and defense, they always say, really can't be separated. There's just too many connections between pitching and defense in baseball. There's too many connections between coverage and pass rush to fully separate these two things, apply control groups and really look at these. It's just too completely connected. The Ravens coverage has a lot to do with it. It's not just the fact that they've been good in coverage. It's the fact they play this cover two, and they start in it. They don't always stay with it. They usually they can have matchup zones on each side. They can do a lot of things from it, but the point of fact is that it creates fear on throwing the ball deep. And right now, Geno Stone is throwing out a bigger cloud back there of darkness or whatever you want to call it over the back end of the field that the quarterbacks don't want to throw into. That than even Marcus Williams probably did last year, and he had a fantastic per snap production year last year. But Geno Stone has been unbelievable in terms of converting things. And whoever the Ravens have played on the other side, which has been Williams, it has been Worley, who's played pretty well there too, and it's been Hamilton for some of the time. It's even been Brandon Stevens for a little bit. They've all been pretty good playing on the back end too. So it seems to be a really plug and play kind of a strong safety position that's been extremely good, allowed Hamilton to move up in the box some too.
And I think you make a great point about, marrying the coverage to the pressure. And I think that's, one of the things that Mike McDonald has done exceptionally well in not only being able to be creative in the way he brings pressure or using sometimes simulated pressure. Sometimes he'll bring a defensive back. Sometimes, it'll be a linebacker, or sometimes it'll just be the guys up front. But the fact that he's able to kind of anticipate what a quarterback or what an offense is looking for in a first read often, and he'll have somebody who's taking away that first read seemingly every single time. And by the time the quarterback is able to make the progression to the second read, the defender's already in his face. There's already pressure there, and he's having to move off his spot. And if he's not an extremely mobile and extremely talented quarterback, he's often, dropping his eyes and either taking a sack or having to throw the ball away or throwing it up for grabs for an interception. And that's how, Geno Stone has kind of benefited a few times, has been a quarterback under pressure, throwing the ball up to a space, and he's been in the right place at the right time and able to make, the interception in a time where, it's very beneficial for the defense in those kind of situations.
There are a lot of instances, as you mentioned, of compound pressures where the quarterback is moved, the quarterback is bothered by color, the quarterback has to somehow drop his eyes, drop the ball, drop whatever, to drop the timing is the really important thing of the play. That creates more time than you can imagine in terms of what the quarterback needs to do to reestablish his chance to get downfield. It's usually the end of a play, but if he loses his eyes. McDonald has a really good sense of which quarterbacks are really bothered by color. Geno Smith is definitely one who's in that class. Goff is in that class. A guy who wasn't in that class was Josh Dobbs, and they didn't really try it nearly as much against Dobbs. They laid off a bunch of their scheme. They did do some stunting, but they didn't use any simulated pressure in that game, and they hardly used any blitzing. They haven't done a lot of blitzing, period, meaning in my case, I'm talking about off-ball blitzes, not numbers, although numbers have been really limited this year. It's been a lot of four-man rushes, but that doesn't necessarily mean the four you see is the four you get.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point about Dobbs, and I think they saw what he could do with his legs a little bit. And he's been one of the better kind of scrambling quarterbacks in the NFL this year. It's not something that maybe the average fan might notice about him, but it's something that he was actually bringing to the Cardinals offense. Is a big reason why they were elevated a little bit. And he's not by any stretch one of the better quarterbacks in the league, but he is a veteran. He's been around, and he was understanding how to work in that offense. And the Ravens, I think, took that away. They didn't want to get beat by that, and they've limited that pretty extremely well, I think, this season. And they haven't, probably faced a lot of the better scrambling quarterbacks in the league. But, Dobbs is one of those guys, and they were able to contain him. And I think, moving forward, there will be probably a few other that might be a little bit better at that. But I think it's something that they'll probably be able to continue. And that's one of the hallmarks of this defense, I think, is McDonald being able to come up with a game plan that's very in tune with what their opponent does well and what he can take away from them. As that's a big feature of what they do on offense. Yeah.
I mean, I agree. And by the way, this is no slight to Wink Martindale, because I think he did a really good job of adjusting to opponents, both, during the season by what his defense was good at, judging, week to week to opponents, but he did have a bias towards pressure. And McDonald definitely has a bias towards coverage and being patient with the pass rush getting home. and trying to create these compound pressure events. And at least initially, it's worked very well. Wink, of course, and his pressure schemes in 2018 or whatnot, when he first took over, were tremendously effective in 2018 and 19. And this is not just favoring one DC over the other, but one of the questions that's come up this week is, should they try and do something to extend McDonald to get him kept around, or deny him interviews? Or I don't think they'll deny him interviews. I just don't think that's something Bisciotti would do. But do you think they'll do something similar to what they did for Eric DaCosta to try and keep him around as an assistant head coach? Maybe give him that promotion, pay him a lot more, and find a way, maybe even in 5 years, to transition to him being the head coach.
I mean, I think they would be foolish not to try to do that. I think, he is maybe one of the best, if not the best, assistant coaches in the NFL right now. What he's doing with good talent, but also elevating the talent around him is really unique. Players that haven't been necessarily all-stars or Pro Bowlers, all-pros coming from other teams come here and they immediately have a major impact role. That's coaching, that's putting them in the right position. And I think if you can give him, we'll pay you to be the highest paid coordinator in the NFL. If that's something that Steve Bisciotti is willing to reach into his pocketbook to do, it's going to make the Ravens a better team because of it. So I would absolutely hope that's something that they're willing to try at least. I do think there will be interviews, and I think that, Harbaugh has always tried to provide his coaches under him those opportunities. He's never tried to hold them back in the past. I don't think he will with Mike McDonald either. But I do think that, there is a chance to build something special here in Baltimore. And, if McDonald goes somewhere else, hopefully there's someone waiting in the wings that can kind of step into the shoes and learn from him and learn kind of, the approach that he's taking. I don't think it's as easy as that, but I think that if he left, it would definitely impact the Ravens on defense to a pretty significant extent.
Right. It'd be this is interesting because they probably do have a succession plan that's getting ready to go. And, if McDonald is here for another year or two, I would think there'd be somebody who could pick up most of what he does to try and implement that. Of course, then there's another head coach running around the NFL who knows what your scheme is. So he's got to put the new guy has to put his imprint on this in some way. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I'm going to have a more thorough discussion of this with Voss on Friday Morning GM this week about how they address the situation with McDonald. But I just did want to bring that up real briefly here. Anyway, certainly one of the Ravens' really big assets. Today on Football Outsiders, or actually it's the former Football Outsiders, which is FTN now, Aaron Schatz has moved his Football Outsiders stats over there. The Ravens now sitting at 23.4% to win the Super Bowl in the Harris playoff odds modeler. The third best DVOA ever through 9 games, behind 2 9-0 teams. It's a Redskins team from 91, I think, and maybe the 2007 Pats. I'm pretty sure that might be it. Yeah. So, this is a team that is being recognized league-wide as being one of the best. It seems like a fairly complete team. I still find myself being more or less amazed by them on a week-by-week basis. As 2 of the last 3 weeks, they've destroyed their opponents in the way they have, good opponents, and even going back to that Cleveland game against a backup quarterback to go ahead and beat them 28-3 in Cleveland. Pretty damn impressive. Are you emotionally ready to accept the notion that this is a team that's likely to go to the Super Bowl?
I mean, I feel like I would be disappointed if they didn't make it to the Super Bowl based off of the way they've played. And a lot can change between week 9 and week 17 or week 18. There's, on the one hand, I think the Ravens are a deep team. So even if there are some unfortunate injuries that may or may not happen, I think they can handle that to a certain extent, perhaps better than they have in years past, especially I think on the skill position part. And I think they have defensive depth as well. I do think they are playing like the best team in the NFL right now. They're 7-2, very easily could have been 9-0. And you can't really talk about the other side of it because they haven't lost any games, or they haven't won any games that they probably should have lost. So, like, all the games they've won have been pretty soundly sound wins.
And the losses, close losses.
Yeah, and close losses. Yeah. So I think, I saw a statistic that like the Steelers, for instance, if you flip the one score wins that they have, they'd be, or if you flipped all their one score games they're in, they would be like 0-8. So the Ravens, conversely, they might have one loss. I guess the Cardinals game would be flipped. But that game was a game that they were really much better, I think, and than the final score indicated in that game. So yeah, I mean, I would be disappointed if they don't make the Super Bowl. I know that the AFC has some good teams in it, and they're going to be tested in the coming weeks. But I feel like this is the team that we've wanted for several years now to get to this level, and they finally put it all together: offensive side of the ball and defensive side of the ball. They have the coaching staff. So far, they've had a fairly healthy season, and those are all the things that you need in order to not just make it, but also to win a championship.
I look at the rest of the season. I say, what positive surprises can the Ravens see? And I think we just saw one on Sunday with Keaton Mitchell.
Yep.
I think we've seen an emergence of Bateman coming back, and we won't talk about this because it's not the offensive show. But the other thing I'm really happy to see again was Isaiah Likely, even though all his targets I think came in the second half, get back in the offense. That just to me is a big deal. They've got to get him back in. Duvernay got a couple of targets late. I don't really anticipate him getting a lot of targets as a wide receiver, but he might get some more gadget plays. They might get him in there and get him gadgetized. And the more of their speed weapons they can use at once, like I love the idea of a pony backfield with Mitchell flanked out. You also have Flowers in an alignment like that, and you have three of your speed guys on the field at once. It could be Duvernay instead or along with. I mean, there might even be some package for all four speed guys, though, there's only one football to go around for you to fake even to any of these players. But I was immediately enamored after 3 carries with Mitchell, and that was before you got the 40 or the 60-yard run.
Yeah, I mean, he just has that short area quickness, that burst. I think I saw a stat about his 10-yard split was basically the second fastest in the combine, just behind Jahmyr Gibbs. The very explosive back. The Lions drafted, I think 8th overall, definitely in the top 10. And Keaton Mitchell had similar level, like short area quickness and explosiveness. Obviously, getting him as an undrafted back, I think, is a coup for the Ravens. He fits a major role on the team, and he's someone that probably isn't going to be a featured back. I don't think there's still going to be a split backfield, but you never know. I mean, if he can handle 10, 12 touches a game, that might be a weapon that nobody was really expecting to emerge for them this year. And I think that's exciting for a team that, as you alluded to, has a lot of other speed options on the field, has a lot of different ways that they can beat you offensively with a defense at the level they're playing with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. It's hard to find a significant weakness there. Right.
Yeah, it's been very fun to see all these emerging talents. I mean, Stevens, obviously a big emerging talent. I think what Linderbaum has done this year in terms of flipping the script as a pass blocker has been one of the really big hidden things about the Ravens. There's people crowing about it, but there's I don't think people understand the significance of it and just how bad he was last year relative to how good he is this year, relative to the league as a pass blocker. I'm not going to plug a show every time a topic comes up, but Timo Riska of PFF joined me. It's the show posted Monday. It is a fantastic explanation of Linderbaum's flip, but he had the wrong data for 2022. And I'm going to post both charts, the 22 and the 23 chart, and you'll just see. I mean, Linderbaum is this guy who's significantly below expectation in 22 and near the top of the league, second or third in 23 of expectation relative to blocking. And by the way, the work that Timo did is first principles, beautiful stuff. What he did is he looked at all these different facets that can occur to make pass blocking more difficult. Like if you have longer down and distances, it makes pass blocking more difficult. If you have screen passes, it makes it easier, blah, 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 blah. So he had a number of factors, about a 10 or 12 factor model. And the Ravens this year have had very easy blocks, but Linderbaum has still exceeded them by a lot. Last year, they had much harder blocks, and Linderbaum was having more difficulty in a relative sense as well. So and some of that is quality of opponent too. But anyway, really worth listening to that if you have a chance to. It's called blocking relative to expectation or something like that. Blocking expectation.
That sounds actually really interesting. Just to interject real quick, because I think that's one of the hidden things that we might not see as much in the down-to-down play is, how much harder it is to block, a 3rd and 10 or 3rd and 15, because the defense has such an advantage there. And when it's 3rd and 5, you have so many more opportunities of what you can do as an offense. You don't have to necessarily drop straight back and pass it. You can do other things. And that just makes it much easier for an offensive line. And I know it seems kind of obvious when you say it that way, but it really kind of shine some light on some of those differences and how the advanced analytics can take a look at that thing and really control for some of those different variables. I think it brings a lot of useful information into it.
Yeah, with league-wide data, they do a good job of it, and the big data with the tracking of the players is going to provide even more. I think this is all done from what PFF has in terms of data, not from the XY coordinate stuff that the Big Data Bowl gives you. But it's fascinating work, and it's something PFF had resisted for many years, is making any sort of adjustment for opponent quality. So I think it's great to hear them doing it. And Timo had some very interesting things to say. He's a very smart guy and great about that. Let me bring it back for one more thing. Is there one thing you take away from this win that is like a great omen for the rest of the year? Defense.
I think for me, this was the first game where I've seen the outside linebackers fully unleashed. And seeing Clowney, Van Noy, Owe rotation as pass rushers, really putting it all together, and just what their versatility and ability can be on the field. Those were the 3 that we were expecting. I think we all expected David Ojabo to kind of be that 3rd pass rusher heading into the season. Obviously, injuries have led to that not working out. But Kyle Van Noy has come in and done just as much, if not more, than what I was expecting Ojabo to do. And Clowney and Owe are both having great seasons. And just seeing all 3 of them having the impact that they had in this game, I think that is very predictive of how well they can play if they're able to stay on the field together throughout the rest of the season, because the Ravens haven't had that 3 outside linebacker rotation like that in quite a while.
Yeah, I guess they had Houston, Bowser, and who was their 3rd guy last year?
Well, probably Owe.
Yeah, Owe. So that actually was pretty good. That was a pretty good group. But anyway, I think this one is obviously being more productive, and I would agree that's a huge thing. I'll give you one other. I loved the alternating, although this makes the game a lot harder to score, the alternation between Worley and Mollett, which is essentially a change between big nickel and standard nickel. So to go down this a little more, and we can skip a packages thing later, Worley was paired with Hamilton. When Hamilton moved to slot corner, Worley played strong safety deep. And then Mollett was in playing slot corner on some of the snaps, and then you'd have Hamilton playing deep. But the Ravens aren't committing themselves to one or the other right now. And I think if Williams were to get healthy, there is no way in hell Geno Stone is coming off the field for another meaningful snap this year. So I think you're kind of forced to play Hamilton in the slot. Not that that's a bad thing. It's a great thing. But that, to me, coming out of this game, the willingness to do either is a nice way of doing it. Mollett didn't have the greatest game. He got thrown over one time on that 35-yard play up the right sideline where he didn't find the ball. He's done some good things for the Ravens. Certainly not been perfect by any stretch. Probably not the ideal slot corner in terms of giving you a lot of the things that Hamilton does, but you only have one Hamilton to put somewhere. And I'm excited by the versatility they've given themselves the rest of the season by making sure that Worley got back in there, and Worley has played very well on the back end this year so far. So that's my element of excitement for this defense.
Yeah, and I think having a guy like Kyle Hamilton allows you to have that flexibility. Regardless of whether it's a package specific thing, depending on what the the other team is showing in terms of their offensive personnel, or if it's just a switch back to what we saw from Hamilton, mostly as a slot defender last year. I think either way, you're in good shape with that.
Right. Yeah, I'm just excited for where that is down the stretch. You know what else was exciting about this game was finally having a decisive snap count win, 73-47. The Ravens had some kneels, and the Seahawks ended up kneeling out the game, which is always nice when you get your opponent to kneel out the game. That's a beautiful thing. I don't know what the etiquette is, but the Ravens kneel twice on 3rd and 4th down to give them the ball back when they could have potentially scored or gotten 300 rushing yards or done any number of things that a fan would probably like to see. But it was nice to see the Seahawks kneel it right back to them in that case. If Pete Carroll runs a play, I think he becomes kind of a mini villain in that situation.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that is a little bit of a nod to sportsmanship between two of the more veteran coaches in the league. And, Harbaugh saying, I'm not going to run in another score on you just because I can. And Carroll saying, you know what, we don't need to run another play either. We're just going to end it as is. So I kind of expected it to go that way, knowing who was coaching. But if it was a younger kind of like,
with the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Guys, I've shared moving. I was using this for all my meals. Now I'm working from home. Guess what? Microwaves in the other room. I'm using this for all my meals. Factor is how I get through my lunch day every day. But they've got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I haven't tried the breakfast ones yet, but why not? I think I might add that to my next order. But I love them for lunch. Plus, they've got new autumn fall flavors out right now for limited time, featuring seasonal veggies like cranberry, pecan chicken, and apple Dijon pork chops. And again, just like everything else, they're ready in just 2 minutes. They'll satisfy your fall cravings during this busy season without the hassle. So go ahead and level up with Gourmet Plus options as well. Prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccoli, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. Head to factormeals.com/Ravens50 and use the code RAVENS50 to get 50% off. That's code RAVENS50 at factormeals.com/Ravens50 to get 50% off your Factor meal today. Aaron Rodgers' season is officially over, but yours has just begun at MyBookie. NFL, college ball, and a brand new cash-out system gives you options to bet and win all season long. First 2 legs of your parlay hit, cash out early and place another bet, or let it ride for a chance at an even bigger payday. Join us at MyBookie for an entire season filled with daily odd boost, same-game parlays, and huge prize pool contests. Right now, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code RAVENS on your first deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 in cash instantly credited to your MyBookie account. That's promo code RAVENS to claim your cash bonus now. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie. Upstart,
it might have gone a little differently, but we'll see.
Well, if you go back to 2019 and that first 59-10 beatdown, the Ravens gave Miami. Flores, right, was the coach at that point. I think it was just having his first game. And he called timeout with the Ravens leading 59-10 at the end of the game to try and it was like, I want to try and get my guys another chance here. What? Yeah. Oh, and then they broke up the team pretty much before the next week because they traded Minka. But anyway, it was what it was. Entire defensive backfield now playing well. Rock Ya-Sin is the forgotten man in a lot of this. Well, there's other forgotten men like JAD is completely forgotten at this point. It's hard to see him getting activated with the way things have gone. But Ya-Sin was ill for a couple of days, and he practiced full on Friday. I don't know if you want to call it a healthy scratch, but he sat out this game with an elevation from Kayvon Seymour off the practice squad. Now, Kayvon, of course, had been cut, re-signed to the practice squad, then elevated. They need him for special teams. But really interesting to see Ya-Sin sit for a game like this. And by the way, they activated Worley, who they obviously really wanted to play safety, and Yassin does not do that. So maybe it makes sense in some sense, but Yassin has played pretty damn well at cornerback to be a healthy scratch.
Yeah, it's interesting. I found, because I don't think Ronald Darby played, although he was active.
He didn't play.
He was active though, so it is interesting how kind of the depth chart is shaking out now, because he was a starting corner for the Ravens earlier this year. Rock Ya-Sin was a little bit more of a rotational player. I know he had some injuries coming into the season, so maybe they're still trying to keep him, fresh and available. But to have those two veterans, basically as either inactives or not seeing a snap is incredible depth at the cornerback position.
Yeah.
And you're seeing very high level play from both Marlon Humphrey and Brandon Stevens. And then, like you mentioned with Millette, he's had really good moments at times. He's had some struggles at times as well. But overall, I think they seem like they're the top three corners, and then whoever else behind them.
So the in terms of percentage of snaps for the season, Stevens is up there. He might have the most snaps as a percentage of anybody. Yeah, he's ahead of both Queen and Smith right now, who are the other two contenders. But he's at 98.6% of snaps played for the year. Hamilton's at 95.1, but we're not really talking about safeties. We want to talk about the corners. Then you have Darby at 41.4, Humphrey at 44%. So Humphrey, obviously, after missing a couple games, came back to playing full time. Millette at 38.1%. Yassin, who a lot of people thought was going to be the number 2 corner on this team, 18.4% of snaps. 18.4.
Yeah.
Barely ahead of Ardarius Washington, who was injured in the second game, has 18.2% of snaps. It's been a really interesting. So it hasn't been any one specific set of players other than Stevens has been the number 1 cornerback kind of the whole year. The Humphrey, I thought, played pretty well this game. Yeah,
absolutely. I think this is Humphrey's best game since he's been back since from the injury, and maybe it was just a matter of him finding his stride a little bit, getting comfortable on the field. Obviously, he had that one big play he gave up in the Steelers game. That was kind of unfortunate, but I think over the long haul he's going to kind of show who he is in big stretches when they need him, because he is, I think, the top guy still, and he's the one that you trust to shut down your opposing number 1 wide receiver if they have a guy who needs to be kind of given that respect from your best cornerback.
Yeah, and the Ravens, honestly, they play such good bracket defense right now. They give their corners a lot of help. So if Humphrey's going to get beat deep, that might not be the worst thing. And Humphrey then provides you that big physical presence up front, can rush the passer. He can do a lot of the things, honestly, that Hamilton can do in the slot. He's just not quite as big or as long to create that looming presence that Hamilton provides you there. But still a great player. Still one of our favorites, obviously. First of all, I don't want to jump ahead to talk about packages here. If there's anything else you'd like to talk about in terms of general thoughts from the games, things that stood out to you before we get into some specifics on packages and pass rush.
I don't think there's anything, one major takeaway that we haven't kind of touched on already, but, and I don't know, you've probably talked about it with other hosts or other guests, and I just find it interesting the way this team is built. The players who are the most impactful on this team are the middle of the defense. It's been Justin Madubuike, it's been Roquan Smith, Kyle Hamilton, to a lesser extent, maybe not a lesser extent, Geno Stone. The middle of the field, they really are solid. They've had some guys move in and out on the edges, both an outside linebacker, cornerback. That hasn't really made a huge impact because they've been so stout up the middle. I should also mention Michael Pierce, who's been a big part of that. That spine of the defense, that isn't how a lot of teams are constructed. There's a few teams out there that are. Maybe San Francisco, for instance, is a good example. You have really strong linebacker play, defensive tackle play, but that's a decision-making process from team building. Where are you going to allocate your draft picks? Where are you going to allocate your cap money? And for the Ravens, it seems like it's paying off in a big way. So I find that to be interesting. And I think it's a unique way that they've been built, and a unique way that as we talked about before with Mike McDonald, is able to use that talent and, build on it to be as good a defense as it can be.
It is if you're going to, have to, the critical question that DaCosta needs to answer right now is, where can I scrimp and still get pretty good production? So where can I use an 80% player at 20% of the price? And most teams, and frankly, most fans, are saying you can't win in without a great edge rusher. And now that the mantra has changed to, you can't win in the playoffs without a great edge rusher. So we have to have Chase Young now. Make that trade, do whatever it takes, make it happen, put it on the credit card. I just hate that talk. I gotta say, like it's a binary. We absolutely have to have this, or we lose the Super Bowl kind of thing. Anyway, what the Ravens have done with the edge rusher group is basically to say, we think we can beat the production curve by spending less, by doing it the way we do. And one thing you notice in the free agent pool, and DaCosta's been great at picking the right players out of this, is that it's very deep in aging pass rushers. Pass rusher is a place where a lot of people come into the NFL. They want to be pass rush specialists. They know pass rushers get paid. Your great athletes gravitate towards that position. Instead of, say, a linebacker position, perhaps they try and bulk up and they try and be an outside linebacker. Sometimes your great interior defensive linemen might try and slim down and try and be an edge. But anyway, you got your great athletes gravitate towards those positions. They tend to be drafted high, and it makes it very hard to find really impactful rookie edges. But that doesn't mean you can't find these veteran edges who just seem to be around the free agent bargain bin every single year. And yes, it wasn't Justin Houston this year who was the guy. It's Kyle Van Noy out there. And Kyle Van Noy, my understanding is, and this is from Jordan, I think primarily, is he thought it was a money thing. Maybe it was Voss, one of the two. Anyway, said he thought it was a money thing, that Van Noy wanted about $5 million a year, and the Ravens, wanted to pay him vet minimum, maybe vet minimum plus incentives. And all they had to do was just wait a while and get him for vet minimum plus incentives. That's all it took.
Yeah, and I'm a little surprised that he was available when he was, considering the general, I would think, need at that position. But like you said, there's a desire more for athleticism, for youth, than necessarily the veteran who might have, theoretically lost a step. But to me, it looks like Kyle Van Noy has not lost a step.
He looks fantastic.
Reinvigorated. Yeah. And we'll talk, I think, probably a little bit more about him later. But what an addition he's been. And, between him and Clowney, wow, they've put on a show for a pair of 30-plus-year-old pass rushers who were kind of left, wanting. Nobody wanted them. And Ravens took up that desire. I mean, they needed it. They had a need. The Ravens definitely had a need, and they found the right players, like you said.
Clowney, it's a change for him, and obviously the Ravens have him with a hand in the dirt a lot. They sometimes have him standing, but he'd been a 4-3 end for really his whole career, and now he's a 3-4 outside linebacker on a fair portion of snaps. They still play 4-2-5 on passing downs and have him hand in the dirt, rushing the passer in the way he's most familiar with. But he's been a great player standing up and holding that edge too, and that's been just one of the really nice things we saw it in this game in particular. So very happy with what he's brought the team. Let's move on a little bit, and we'll jump into some package information. I don't have a lot to say about this. And, normally in past years with Wink and all the multiple packages he would run, all these race car things, and there's basically been two things that have really limited packages for the Ravens this year. The first one is a lack of available outside linebackers. I mean, you can't do 3 and 4 outside linebacker packages. Almost everything is still a 2. And the other is that they have a committed nickel defense in terms of having 2 linebackers they keep on the field at all times. So they never really play more than 5 defensive backs. They've had 3 snaps the whole year where they played with 6 defensive backs. So those two things combined mean the Ravens would have base and nickel are basically their 2 packages. And I had been including all nickel snaps together earlier in the season when Hamilton was getting a 100% slot corner role. And, last year he was for the last 8 games or so, he's basically 100% slot corner role. When the Ravens had 5 defensive backs on the field, and then he moved back to strong safety otherwise. But the point being that Hamilton is a guy who I was treating as just a regular slot corner, and now we're in the situation where they're kind of making a choice between him and Mollett. And so for this game anyway, I divided those snaps into the big nickel snaps and the regulars, the standard nickel snaps, which have Mollett at slot corner, just to see what the results were like. Now, this is a little bit interesting. First of all, in base defense, they played that only 6 times the whole game, 10 yards per play, mostly driven by that 50-yard pass play early on.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's an outlier, right? If in a 6 snap sample size, one big play, that's going to change the numbers quite a bit.
I appreciate that. Always nice to have scientists on the field who understand sample size arguments, and you are one of those. All 5 DB rush packages combined then were all the remaining snaps. So that ended up being 40 of those. 20 big nickel and 20 of the standard nickel. This is a nice, control group, standardized sizes. They had, I've got that on another sheet. That's why I can't seem to find it in what I'm doing here. But when they were in the standard nickel, they gave up 68 yards on 20 plays, so 3.4 yards per play. Nothing wrong with that by any stretch. When they're in big nickel, 20 plays, and I've got to go to a different place to get this here because it was substantially better. So sorry, folks. When they were in big nickel, 20 plays, 23 yards, 1.2 per play, 2 sacks and 2 turnovers. Wow. Okay. So part of that is Worley outplaying Mollett. The other part of it, the other major part of it, is Hamilton providing more in the front end than he does on the back end. I think you just get more out of Hamilton when you put him in a position to make more plays, create pressure, push a guy around at the line of scrimmage as a receiver, do all the things that Hamilton does. And if I had to guess, I think they're going to stick with Hamilton this next week at slot corner. I don't think they're going to go back to Mollett. And I think when Williams, I think they're happy with what Worley's doing in the back end. He's clearly outplaying Mollett. And that'll give them a chance then. It'll prepare them for when Williams returns to have Hamilton be at full time at slot corner.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, both in terms of the matchup that they'll have against Cleveland, who outside of Amari Cooper doesn't necessarily have the most intimidating wide receiver core. Mm-hmm. And he's more of an outside receiver anyway, so there's not probably a lot of one-on-one matchups that he would have with Kyle Hamilton in the slot. I think that would potentially be the one concern about Hamilton playing predominantly in the slot. And, I've thought that quite a bit, and it hasn't really come to fruition. He's been very good in that role, kind of regardless of who he's going against. Mm-hmm. And especially if you can put him over like a tight end that's lined up in the slot, he's exceptionally good in that role at covering tight ends. He kind of is a tight end eraser at this point. So I can see that happening, and makes complete sense as well. With Marcus Williams coming back, you can't take Geno Stone off the field. He's been too good for them, and having him and Williams on the back end just provides so much, coverage ability and range in the back end, and an ability to, move into the box if you want to with Stone or Williams, who's also played pretty well in the box. He can come up and do some nice things there. That I think that makes a lot of sense moving forward. And, the Ravens have depth at cornerback. They don't necessarily need to have 3 safeties on the field, but if they're your best, 5 defensive backs, if it includes 3 safeties, then absolutely have them all out there.
Yeah, I didn't want the tail to wag the dog in terms of where Hamilton would line up, but Stone is looking like the dog right now in terms of, he's got to be on the field. He's demanding a spot. So somebody else has to lose one, and then you have to figure out. And got such good results from Hamilton up front. I think it really does make sense. And I don't even really concern myself that much about when Hamilton is trying to cover a fast receiver, like if you had a Tyler Lockett or if you had even Tyreek Hill playing out of the slot. Mollett's not going to be able to stay with him either. And nor is anybody else. If you put Marlon Humphrey in there or other players, there's not anyone fast enough to do it, to deal with his whip routes and whatnot. You might as well have a physical guy who could beat the crap out of him and also create problems for Mahomes by being too large for him to throw over.
Yeah, and the added benefit as well of having a very large person in that position in run defense.
Yes,
I think that's an added benefit. And in the pass rush, we've seen the Kyle Hamilton pass rush game where he had 3 sacks on 3 identical blitzes. It was quite impressive. He's capable of doing that as well.
The Ravens slot corners this year have 6 sacks, and they've all been right to the quarterback sacks. Nobody's really been blocked on any of those plays. All right, let's talk about the pass rush a little bit. And I did want to ask you this. There's been talks about Ndamukong Suh coming to the Ravens. Would you be in favor of that, to get a 6th defensive lineman, give that rotation more depth? They've obviously played a lot of snaps because they always keep 2 on the field this year, which is unusual for them. I
wouldn't say no to it. I don't think. I don't know if they need it, but they have been healthy. So if they were to lose someone like Pierce or to Matabike for any amount of time, I think, Travis Jones is a good player. I think he would be solid. Broderick Washington, also a good player, but they would lose some juice in the middle. And I think, having a veteran body who's been there recently and played well recently, I think would actually help them quite a bit.
Okay, so the Ravens have played 2.18 defensive linemen per play this season, and they played a lot of nickel. They played on 85% or 82% of their snaps relatively at nickel. So it's going to be about that number. So 2.18 anyway. That means if you're 5 guys you're depending on, they have to average 43.8% or 43.6% or something snaps. 43.6, I think it is, per percentage of the snaps that they play in order to fill all those snaps. That's actually quite high. There's not too many defensive linemen who can be unaffected by that kind of a camp. And in fact, right now, Matabike is playing like over 60% of the snaps. I think 65. And Pierce has been playing about 56% of the snaps. Both those numbers are way too high. And is one of the things I'm concerned about on this defense if I had to pick something. So I really would love the idea of getting a backup, a 6th guy, even if it means you have to deactivate somebody on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And, I like Brent Urban a lot. Like he's a great guy. He's a good player. But I think there is definitely a bit of a step down if he has to be out there for, 30 snaps a game, 25, 30 snaps a game. Someone like Sue, I think, is more of a dominating run defender, similar to what they have out there with a Michael Pierce. And I'm not saying Pierce is going to get hurt, but like he hasn't been, necessarily the most healthy player over his career. And while Travis Jones is probably a good replacement, then who takes Travis Jones' snaps? There's like a trickle down effect. And I think, just having someone who else could just take some of that burden, like you said, on a game to game basis, so that lessens the risk of having an injury over the course of the season as well. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. There are still people who will tell you, "Oh, Patrick Ricard can go in on defense," but I think that ship is pretty well sailed at this point. But we'll see. Hopefully, we won't see actually, but we could see, I guess. Let's move on and talk about the pass rush a little bit. This is a game where McDonald made just modest use of numbers again. Every single play, the Ravens rushed 4 or 5 again in this game, which is fairly remarkable, actually, that they've been so set in their ways in terms of not rushing 3, not rushing 6. But with a 4-man rush, they had 24 plays, 101 yards, 4.2 yards per play, 3 sacks and 2 turnovers. 3 sacks with 24 4-man rushes. That is an astounding number to get a 12.5% sack rate on 4-man rushes. And throw in 2 turnovers while you're at it. And then with 5-man rush, they had 8 plays, 22 yards. So it was only 2.8 yards per play, small sample size, but they had 1 sack there, duplicating their 12.5% sack rate with a 4-man rush. They didn't have any 3s, no 6s. And so, they allowed only 3.8 yards per pass play. That's the big story here with 4 sacks and 2 turnovers. It's going to be really hard to bifurcate or split out these sacks. In some ways, it's going to create bad splits, but it's still outstanding how much pressure they're getting without sending numbers.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it's a lot of scheme, but it's not just scheme. Like it's a lot of players playing really well in that scheme. And a lot of one-on-one wins that we're seeing. Justin Matabike is, I think, he's leading. I think still leading the NFL.
Yes, leading the ideals.
Interior defensive line. We've had Kyle Benoit. We talked about him a little bit earlier. 5 sacks, and he hasn't played even full season for them or full half season. He's also interesting because he's really just been a situational pass rusher for them. He hasn't been someone who has been like that 1-for-1 Tyus Bowser replacement that I think some of us expected going into the season if he was picked up. And part of that, I think, is the difference between Wake Martindale and Mike McDonald, how they utilize the outside linebacker position. But also, he's being put in a position where he's just pretty much being asked to rush faster, and he's doing really well in that role. And they have used him. They've moved him around. He's come off of, stunts and twists and some blitzes where he's lined up off the ball and come, as a late blitzer at times. But he's shown that he is capable of, winning with pure speed off the edge as well. And that's how his second sack in this game happened was he just went off the edge and got that strip sack. So he's someone who has shown a lot of versatility in what he can do from that position.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a great spin move. We're seeing Owe with a great spin move this year, and he it's not like he never displayed it. We're seeing it more. Maybe it's the fact that Van Noy is doing it and being so effective. Maybe there's some interchange there we wouldn't really know. Van Noy's, as to your point, has only dropped a cover 8 times this year, which is 6% and double the rate that Clowney had dropped previous in his career to coming to Baltimore. But it's still nothing like normal Sam linebacker usage for a Raven, with Bowser dropping in 32% of his snaps in his career previous to this year. So anyway, I expected Van Noy to be much more of a pass rush presence than he is, and he's been just a pass rusher. But if he's playing at this level, that's fine.
Yeah, and Owe, you mentioned him just now. He's been really good since he got back. He has a good pressure rate. He only has 2 sacks, I think, but he's getting after the quarterback and getting pressures. I think he's hands down playing the best football of his career. In his third year, he's having a bit of a breakout alongside someone like Justin Matabike, who's obviously having the best season of his career. Which it might be a combination of having the right players around him, the right scheme, or just having some time. Like in the NFL, sometimes it takes some time for players to be in the right position to feel comfortable with what they're being asked to do. Sometimes physically for them to develop and be able to really take on that week in, week out punishment of the position, especially playing in the trenches. So for whatever reason, we're getting such a great performance for all of them. It's really coming together in a great way.
Yeah, there's a sum of greater than the parts kind of component to this I love, but Owe in particular was asked to do a number of things that kind of, in my opinion, stunted his growth slightly. That might have been true also with Brandon Stevens in terms of getting him to play other places on the field, but Stevens doesn't belong anywhere but outside cornerback right now. Worley, they asked to make the change, and he made it like that late career in terms of going from corner to safety. At least that's our thought. But if you go back and look at when Worley was drafted, he was a guy they thought was going to be a safety because he wasn't fast enough to play corner. He's big, but he's not fast enough. And it took a few years for some team to eventually figure out, and 18 transactions or whatever it was last year to figure out that this guy's a safety. And now he's looking good. I want to go over the ATS BOQ pressure details from this game because I thought they were interesting. So first of all, they gave Smith ample time space on 7 of 32 dropbacks, 22%. That's about an average number. It's probably a little better than average, even for the Ravens. He went 3 of 7 for 54 yards on those passes. So 7.7 yards per pass. That's not even that good. Maybe 10 yards would be good. Flacco, maybe it was 8.5 was good. But he also threw his interception with an ample time space. So it's not a good set of ample time and space results for Geno Smith in this game. He delivered the ball before pressure could develop 7 more times. So that's another 22% of the snaps, 4.6 yards per play. Again, that's maybe a yard below the average for a ball out quick time. You expect a lot of those passes, they're very high percentage of completions. They often go to the outside, little screens, little dump offs, slants and whatnot, but they tend to be high percentage of passes, usually for short yardage. Very rarely are they a deep shot. But you do occasionally have a deep shot down the sideline, but it's actually fairly rare. So 4.6 yards per play, a little bit below average, but that's not where Geno Smith had trouble. Now we get into pressure. The Ravens generated 18 pressures on only 32 dropbacks, 56%. I believe that's their highest of the year. They were over 50 one other time, if I recall correctly. That included 4 sacks and 1 turnover, and with that turnover was on a strip sack. So with pressure, Geno Smith with 3 of 14 plus 4 sacks for minus 13 net yards, minus 0.7 yards per play. Now there's bad and there's incredibly bad, and that fits into the really incredibly bad group there. There was one other quarterback recently, it might have been Dobbs, who was at minus 2.3, but they that is just utterly horrible. They'd be below 0 net yards per pass play like that.
I mean, that's so impressive by the Ravens defense to be able to generate those types of numbers. And it gets to the, the pressure obviously impacting the quarterback, but also having the coverage on the back end. So it's not just leaving open receivers who are running free. That was kind of the hallmark of the Martindale pressure events. Often when you brought 6-7 guys to generate that pressure, there's somebody who was open behind it. That's not the case any longer with this defense. So, if you're not getting the ball out quick, you're often either taking a sack or throwing it away because there's nothing else that you can do against this defense. And this is a team with good, wide receivers. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith and Jigba. This is not a team with slouches at the receivers. They have good running backs. Their offensive line might not be the best, but it's not a horrific unit by any stretch. It just goes to show you how good they can be.
I think they did with regard to your last point about the offensive line. I think they did play with some of the discontinuity they've had on the offensive line. Just in this game, They went with Jason Peters at right tackle, and they switched to Stone Forsythe during the game. And I don't know. I mean, we're collecting notes on a play-by-play basis and having to go back and check if it's 70 or 78 at right tackle who's getting beat. But I mean, they were showing up fairly regularly in the notes. They've got discontinuity in other spots too. They've had, I think, something like 11 different lineup combinations so far this year. That's what the Know Your Foe guy had mentioned. So it was an impressive. I think they did a good job trying to show Smith color under these circumstances and try and do some things like simulated pressure that can really screw up an offensive line and get them having trouble. And stunts as well are good for that.
Yeah, I think the stunts in this game in particular were very effective.
Oh yeah,
and that's one of the things that can be really useful against an offensive line that's not necessarily used to playing so much together. Communication is a big part of picking up stunts, and the Ravens took advantage of that.
Yeah. So let's go with the stunts first, since you're talking about it. But they had 10 plays on which they stunted, a total of 13 stunts. So they had 3 doubles and 7 singles among that. There used to be a player, the game X's and O's football, and people like my age will remember this game, or maybe even a little younger, that this was around, and you usually had one player on the defense who had some play that was special for him, but otherwise, you ran a bunch of different plays and called one particular play was called Double Twist Willie, and this is the kind of thing they run that was made to represent all these double twist plays. Anyway, 10 plays, 7 yards. On plays that had stunts. So 0.7 yards per play on those plays. Off-ball blitzes, something they did a little bit in this game, but only 5 times, 0.16 per play. That's very low. That would, Wink Martindale would be flipping out, having to blitz that little from off-ball. But 3.0 yards per play when they came with an off-ball blitz. So that also gave Geno some trouble, even more than his overall poor passing in this game. And then here's the big one, simulated pressures. They used 6 times for 2+, and I got to go to my other sheet, which has this. And the total yardage on those was 3 yards, so 0.5 yards per play on simulated pressures. Then, after all that, when they combined elements of deception, they did that 6 times for minus 10 yards. So the more deception that he threw at them, everything worked in this game. There were only a couple of big plays, the 50 and the 35, were plays obviously that didn't include any of this deception with them.
Yeah, one of my favorite kind of pressure looks that they've used this year has been the kind of the stunt up front with, I think it's often like Matt BK kind of crashing down, and then either Owe looping around or Clowney, or sometimes you'll have Patrick Queen come in and kind of pick the guard who's being already engaged and either leaves Queen very open to kind of then ping pong basically into a sack, or the offensive lineman will kind of have to disengage to pick up Queen, and the the other defender has a clean look at the quarterback, and they've executed this, exceptionally well on multiple occasions. And that's one of those, combination type events where you have multiple different elements at play there.
That's well described, because the guy who runs the pick or the under player on the stunt is often Madubuike, and he's diving right into that gap, that A gap, usually between the garden center on one side. And those guys both get half a block there. And then when one block gets peeled off, that under player is often the guy who gets the big shot to take down the quarterback, because the remaining block on him almost always is heavily disadvantaged in terms of its angle and ability to hold off a player like Madubuike, who's a pretty natural one-on-one shedder anyway. But when you have one guy blocking at a 45-degree angle, he's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and Madubuike's athleticism really taking advantage of in those stunts up front. He's quite a nimble player for his size. Someone who's I think around 300 pounds, maybe 290. He moves so fluidly for someone his size. Obviously, Owe, Clowney, they're both athletic. Van Noy, there's a lot of athleticism, agility up front, and that's needed on these stunts in order to execute them effectively. And they've been taking advantage of that for sure.
One thing that I kind of made the point at in the article, and people can go look at it because I'm not going to talk about it other than this, is to say that Madubuike and Pierce have been paired up this year a lot. In fact, they played the exact same 27 snaps in this game, and it's largely because they have complementary pass rush characteristics that they've been trying to use. And Madubuike and Pierce are kind of pass rush specialists at this point. Both those guys are coming in on third down. It's not like the Ravens don't want them also on first and second down, but McDonald's at a point where he really needs to watch it in terms of keeping those guys healthy. And I think it's really going to be keeping those guys healthy so they can be effective rushing the passer down the stretch, because that's the higher leverage plays where they're really going to get that, which means it's going to have to be a higher reliance on Travis Jones as we move forward. And he's playing great, by the way, too. But.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it's tough to kind of take Michael Pierce off the field on those early down plays, because he's also been dominant as a run offender at times. So you don't necessarily want to lose that. But I do think what he adds as an interior pass rusher and someone who can, compress the pocket on a important third down is more important than, potential run defense on a 1st and 10 play.
Yeah. All right. Outstanding stuff. Gabe, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some individual performances. We're going to go through a mailbag and some questions there. We're going to talk about our MVPs from this game, because, hey, the Ravens got to win, and we want to talk MVPs. But first, tell folks where they can find your work and talk football with you online.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Gabe Fergie. It's probably the easiest way to talk if you want to just drop a line or have a question about the Ravens. You want to discuss something, and then we've kind of had a couple week hiatus, but we are back this week. The Situation Room on Filmstudy Baltimore. We have a podcast, Jordan Coe and I. So we recently dropped a short kind of, we're back and we have some interesting things to say about the Ravens, and then we're going to come back with a more detailed podcast about this game and what we're looking forward to in the coming weeks as well, because we're about midway point through the season right now, and I think there's a lot of thought about the season as a whole and way things are headed. So we wanted to kind of chime in on that.
Highly recommend Gabe and Jordan's pod. They're both regular guests on this show. That means I respect them a lot in terms of their opinions, how much fun it is to talk football with them, because it's a long commitment. By the way, I don't want to do the show with just anybody, because it's a 2-hour commitment to talk football with somebody, and you really want to, but having somebody who you really enjoy just doing it with. But anyway, really appreciate you guys and what you do, and it's some great stuff. You guys need to give it a chance and give it a listen. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I'll get back to you very quickly. We'll see if we can turn your idea into a show, hopefully a 15 or 20-minute show. So let's not, recreate the Big Bang Theory from, as a retrospective here. Let's instead try and focus on some relatively small element of the Ravens game. And believe me, it'll be a more significant conversation than you think. And we can have some fun with that. Gabe, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always appreciate it. It's always a good time.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.